I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking, my heart lurching as a shadow slipped through the dark. It was 2 a.m., and Javier, my straight best friend, stood frozen in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the faint glow of the Brooklyn streetlights. What he did next changed everything I thought I knew about us. My name is Kale, a 23-year-old graphic designer scraping by in a cramped Bushwick apartment. I'm black, queer, and unapologetically myself, though I've learned to keep parts of me locked away, especially around Javier. He's 24, Latino, a construction worker with a laugh that fills rooms and a smile that makes you forget your own name. We met 2 years ago at a dive bar in Williamsburg, bonding over cheap beer and a shared love for old vinyl records. He's the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, but he's also the guy who'd never cross the line into anything more than friendship. At least that's what I thought. That night, I'd crashed early, exhausted from a freelance deadline. My room was a mess. Sketchbooks strewn across the floor, a half-empty coffee mug on the nightstand, and my phone buzzing with unread texts. I didn't hear Javier come in. He'd been crashing on my couch for a week while his place was being fumigated. But the creak of the door snapped me awake. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and there he was, standing just inside the threshold, his broad shoulders tense, his hands fidgeting like he was wrestling with something bigger than himself. "Javi," I mumbled, sitting up, my voice thick with sleep. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his work boots scuffing the hardwood. The moonlight caught his face. Those sharp cheekbones, the shadow of stubble, the way his brown eyes flickered with something I couldn't read. I couldn't sleep," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I needed to tell you something." My stomach twisted. Javier wasn't the type to spill his feelings. He was all action, fixing my leaky sink, dragging me to pick up basketball games, teasing me about my terrible cooking. But this was different. I pulled the blanket up to my chest, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between us. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest. "Kale," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been thinking about you, like a lot, and it's messing with my head." I froze. Javier, my straight friend, the guy who dated half the women in our friend group, was sitting on my bed in the middle of the night saying this. My mind raced, torn between hope and fear. Was this a confession? A prank? A sleep-deprived ramble? I'd spent months burying my feelings for him, convincing myself they were one-sided, that he'd never see me the way I saw him. But now his knee was inches from mine, and the air felt electric. "Javi, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might bolt. But then he leaned closer, his hand brushing my arm, sending a jolt through me. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I know I feel something. For you." The world tilted. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to pull him close and never let go. But I also knew Javier, his Catholic upbringing, his macho co-workers, the way he'd always shied away from anything that challenged the life he'd built. This wasn't just a moment. It was a cliff's edge, and we were both teetering. "Javi, you're straight," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You've always been straight." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I don't know what I am anymore. All I know is I can't stop thinking about you, about us." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But I'd been burned before. By crushes who swore they were curious. By friends who got scared and ran. I looked at him, at the way his hands trembled, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and I made a choice. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's talk. But not here, not now. Tomorrow, okay? When we're both awake." He nodded, relief and fear mixing in his expression. As he left my room, the door clicking shut behind him, I lay back, my heart pounding. Sleep was impossible now. His words echoed in my head, a loop I couldn't escape. What had just happened? And what the hell was going to happen next? The next morning, the apartment felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Javier was already up, making coffee in my tiny kitchen, his back to me as I shuffled in. He didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Morning," I said, testing the waters. "Morning," he replied, his voice careful. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. My skin burned where he touched me. We sat at the wobbly kitchen table, the silence heavy. I wanted to ask about last night, to demand answers, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, he spoke. "I meant what I said, Kale. I'm not messing with you, but I'm scared, man. This isn't me. Or at least, I didn't think it was." I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," I said, though my heart was screaming for clarity. "But you need to be honest. With me, with yourself. Because I can't." I stopped, my throat tight. "I can't do halfway. Not with you." He looked at me, his eyes soft but determined. "I don't want halfway either. I just need time." Time. It was a word that carried too much weight. I'd spent years waiting. For acceptance. For love. For someone to see me and not flinch. But Javier wasn't just someone. He was my best friend. The guy who'd seen me at my worst and stayed. Could I wait for him to untangle his heart? Could I risk my own in the process? That afternoon, we went for a walk through Prospect Park, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. The city hummed around us, but it felt like we were in our own bubble. Javier was quieter than usual, but he stayed close, his shoulder brushing mine as we walked. "You ever think about what it'd be like?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "You and me, like together?" My breath caught. "Every day," I admitted, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. He stopped walking, turning to face me. The park was alive with joggers, dog walkers, kids chasing each other, but all I saw was him. "I'm not saying I'm ready," he said, "but I'm not saying I'm not." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. For now. The days that followed were a tightrope walk. Javier didn't bring up that night again, but the air between us had changed, charged with something unspoken. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a question neither of us was ready to answer. We fell back into our routine, grabbing takeout, arguing over what record to play, pretending everything was normal. But I caught him watching me sometimes, his eyes lingering a little too long when I laughed or when I stretched out on the couch. It was torture, this dance of almosts, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand it. One evening, we ended up at a rooftop party in Bed-Stuy, hosted by a mutual friend, Lena, a 26-year-old bartender with a knack for throwing chaotic, unforgettable nights. The rooftop was strung with fairy lights, the skyline glittering beyond. Javier was his usual charming self, cracking jokes with Lena's coworkers, but I felt him orbiting me, always close enough to feel his presence. "You good?" he asked, sidling up with 2 beers in hand. The crowd pulsed around us, music thumping, but his voice cut through it all. "Yeah," I lied, taking the beer. My eyes flicked to a guy across the rooftop, tall, blonde, clearly interested in Javier. He'd been flirting with him earlier, and Javier hadn't exactly shut it down. My chest tightened. Was this jealousy, or just fear that I'd misread everything? Javier followed my gaze, then leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. "You don't have to worry about him," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "He's not my type." I turned, our faces inches apart. "And who is?" I asked, half challenging, half desperate. He didn't answer, just held my gaze, his lips twitching into a small, secretive smile. My heart stuttered. Before I could say anything else, Lena dragged us into a game of beer pong, and the moment slipped away. But later, as the party wound down and we sat on the edge of the rooftop, legs dangling over the city, Javier spoke again. "You ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what?" he asked, staring out at the lights. I nodded. All the time. Growing up, I ran from who I was. Took me years to stop. He turned to me, his expression raw. "I'm running, Kale. From this. From whatever this is." He gestured between us, his voice cracking. "But I don't want to anymore." My pulse raced. "Then don't," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Stay. Figure it out with me." He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me right there, with the city sprawled out below us. But then someone called his name, and the spell broke. He stood, offering me a hand to pull me up, and we rejoined the party, the weight of his words lingering like a promise. The next week was a blur of work and late-night talks. Javier started opening up about his family, his dad's expectations, the way his coworkers tossed around slurs like they were nothing. "I never thought about it before," he admitted one night, sprawled on my couch with a beer. "How it must feel for you. I hate that I didn't see it." "You see it now," I said, my voice soft. "That's what matters." He reached for my hand, his fingers tentative but warm. "I want to be better. For you. For us." It was the closest he'd come to saying what we both felt. I squeezed his hand, my heart too full to speak. But the fear was still there, a shadow in the corner of every moment. What if he changed his mind? What if this was too much for him? That fear came crashing down a few days later. We were at a diner in Greenpoint, splitting a plate of fries, when Javier's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face darkening. "It's my brother," he said, standing abruptly. "I gotta take this." He stepped outside, but through the diner's window, I could see him pacing, his voice rising. When he came back, he looked shaken. "My dad's been asking about me," he said, sliding into the booth. "Says I've been distracted. He heard I've been crashing here." My stomach dropped. Javier's dad was old school, the kind of man who saw the world in black and white. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I need to figure out how to handle this." The rest of the meal was quiet, the ease between us gone. I wanted to push, to demand he tell me what he was thinking, but I couldn't, because deep down I was terrified of the answer. The tension between us grew heavier after that night. Javier was still staying at my place, but he was distant, his smiles forced. I tried to give him space, but every unanswered text, every avoided glance, felt like a cut. One afternoon, I came home to find him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "You okay?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "My dad wants me to come home for dinner this weekend. He's suspicious." "Suspicious of what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Of me. Of us." He stood, pacing the small living room. He's been talking to my brother, asking why I'm spending so much time here. I don't know what to tell him. My chest tightened. Tell him the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Or don't. But you can't keep running from this, Javi. He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto mine. You think it's that easy? You think I can just tell my family I might be? He cut himself off, his hands balling into fists. I'm not like you, Kale. I wasn't raised to be open about this stuff. The words stung, but I swallowed the hurt. I'm not asking you to be me. I'm asking you to be honest. He didn't respond, just grabbed his jacket and left. The door slammed behind him, and I stood there, the silence deafening. For the first time, I wondered if I'd been wrong to hope. The next few days were torture. Javier came and went, barely speaking. I threw myself into work, sketching logos until my eyes burned, but nothing could drown out the ache. I kept replaying that night in my room, his words, the way his hand felt on mine. Had I imagined the connection? Was I just a phase for him? Friday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him, we need to talk. For real. He didn't reply, but an hour later, he walked through the door, his face tired but determined. Okay, he said, dropping onto the couch. Let's talk. I sat across from him, my heart in my throat. What's going on, Javi? Are you in this or not? He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tight. I want to be, he said, his voice low. But it's not just about me. My family, my job, it's complicated. Complicated how? I pressed. Because of me? Because I'm a guy. He flinched. It's not about you being a guy. It's about me not knowing how to do this. I've never felt like this before, Kale. Not with anyone. His words hit me like a wave, equal parts hope and fear. Then why are you pulling away? I asked, my voice breaking. Why does it feel like you're already gone? He stood, crossing the room in 2 strides. Before I could react, he was in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. I'm not gone, he said, his voice fierce. I'm right here. I'm just scared. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. I'm scared too, I admitted. But I'm not running. For a moment we just stood there, the space between us crackling. Then he pulled me into a hug, his arms tight around me, his breath warm against my neck. I'm trying, he whispered. I swear I'm trying. I held on to him, my hands fisting in his shirt, afraid to let go. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. The weekend came and Javier went to his family's dinner. I stayed home, sketching to keep my mind off the worst-case scenarios. When he came back, he looked drained, his eyes red-rimmed. It didn't go well, he said, sinking onto the couch. My dad asked about you. I didn't know what to say, so I just left. My heart sank. What does that mean for us? I asked. He looked at me, his expression raw. I don't know yet, but I know I don't want to lose you. The weeks that followed were a fragile dance. Javier stayed, but the shadow of his family loomed large. We didn't talk about that night in my room again, but we didn't need to. It was there in every shared glance, every brush of his hand against mine. One evening, we ended up at a small jazz club in Harlem, the kind of place where the music wraps around you like a warm blanket. We sat in a corner booth, the saxophone weaving through the air. Javier was relaxed for the first time in weeks, his knee pressed against mine under the table. You ever think about leaving? He asked suddenly, his voice almost lost in the music. Like, starting over somewhere new? I took a sip of my drink, considering. Sometimes, but this city, it's home. It's where I found myself. Where I found you. He smiled, a real one, and my heart ached with how much I wanted us to work. "I don't know if I can stay," he said, his voice soft. "Not if my family keeps pushing." I reached for his hand, my fingers lacing through his. "Then we figure it out together," I said. "Whatever happens." He squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with something like hope. For the first time, I let myself believe we might make it. But reality has a way of crashing in. A few days later, Javier's brother, Mateo, showed up at my apartment unannounced. He was older, broader, with the same sharp cheekbones as Javier but none of his warmth. "You Kale?" he asked, his voice cold. "Yeah," I said, my stomach twisting. "What's this about?" He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for evidence. "Javi's been acting weird. My dad thinks it's because of you." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "And what do you think?" "I think you're trouble," he said bluntly. "Javi's not like you. He's got a life, a family. Don't drag him into your mess." Anger flared, but I kept it in check. "Javier's a grown man. He makes his own choices." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Stay away from him," he said, then turned and left. When Javier got home, I told him everything. His face darkened, his hands clenching. "I'll talk to him," he said, but his voice was shaky. "Javi, you don't have to fight this alone," I said. "I'm here." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "I know," he said finally, "but I need to do this. For me." The next day, he went to see his family. I waited, my nerves fraying with every passing hour. When he came back, he looked like he'd been through a war. "I told them," he said, his voice hollow, "about us, about how I feel." My heart stopped. "And they didn't take it well," he said, his eyes glistening. "My dad, he said I'm not his son anymore." I pulled him into my arms, holding him as he broke. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my own tears falling. "But you're not alone. You've got me." He clung to me, his sobs muffled against my shoulder. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything to protect him, to protect us. The fallout was brutal. Javier moved in with me permanently, his family cutting him off. He threw himself into work, but I could see the toll it took. The way he'd stare at his phone, waiting for a call that never came. I tried to be his anchor, but some days I wasn't sure I was enough. One night, we sat on my couch, a record spinning softly in the background. Javier was quiet, his head resting on my shoulder. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Letting me in?" I turned to him, my heart aching. "Never," I said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You're worth it." He looked at me, his eyes soft but haunted. "I don't know if I am," he admitted, "but I'm trying to be." I leaned in, kissing him for the first time. It was soft, tentative, but it felt like coming home. He kissed me back, his hands framing my face, and for a moment, the world was just us. The months that followed weren't easy. Javier struggled with his family's rejection, with the whispers at work. But he also started to find himself. He went to a support group for queer Latinos, found a therapist, began to rebuild. And through it all, we built something together. A life, messy and imperfect, but ours. One evening, we walked through Brooklyn, the city alive around us. Javier stopped suddenly, pulling me close. "I love you," he said, his voice steady for the first time in months. "I don't know if I'm good at this yet, but I love you." Tears stung my eyes as I smiled. "I love you too," I said, my voice thick. "And we've got time to figure it out." We stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming around us. It wasn't a perfect ending. His family was still distant, and the world wasn't always kind. But it was our ending, hard-won and real. And as we walked home, hand in hand, I knew we'd face whatever came next together.